Well, difference between trust and being reckless. I think trust is purpose towards a certain goal. So one might trust in God and do such as will increase one's trust, which will include, in fact, avoiding risks that could damage such. This is a sort of consistent perhaps with any goal behaviour where we try to focus on those things that help towards the goal and avoid those things that seem to do the contrary, not help at all, actually harm and slow us in achievement of such goals. So we become very focused, not just in our attention on the goal, but on what's likely to be a benefit to it and what's not, so that we choose one and avoid the other. This makes us very economic with our resources, our time, our attention, our what we risk and what we don't risk. Of course, in a war situation, you may find you take certain risks because, well, it may be because you're facing a disaster otherwise, and it drives you to go to the alternative behaviours that at times, normal times you would have rejected, but in a desperate situation, perhaps it's the best thing to try, but we'll see. So there are circumstances in which risk-taking may be rational, as where, you're going to lose the war anyway unless you do so and so, and assuming the war is truly, losing it is truly catastrophic. So often what we think of as something bad happening actually isn't terribly bad at all, something that's quite tolerable and even a blessing in some ways. And sometimes, of course, you've found that a disaster in your life has incredibly good consequences as well. I mean, to be sort of unfortunate example might be a divorce might leave you free for an alternative, most satisfying, arguably lifelong relationship that you would not have otherwise have had. So although this divorce might have been forced on you by, say, the other party, it turned out to be what we might say in the longer run to be a tremendous blessing. And perhaps, since we're survivors, much of life can be seen as that. Unless, of course, you see your life as a deterioration through time, in which case disasters were indeed disasters, I suppose. Now there's a sort of psychological reinforcement goes on in what we might call religion, where we reinforce our trust regularly and constantly. The Sunday service is to reinforce your trust and belief. It might be reinforcing it in such a rigid and narrow way that it doesn't allow your belief to actually prosper, but stay petrified in what turns out to be in anything but satisfactory state in the long run. And then we would say, in some sense, well, this is a bad religion in that case, if this is what tends to happen, because we value life and fullness of life, and by which we mean joy and peace and hope and love and creativity and what we might call positiveness, as opposed to or sort of rigor mortis and depression and, for instance, loneliness. And I do mean loneliness as opposed to being very happily on one's own, which is not the same as it's alone, but not loneliness in that emotive and unwanted sense of lacking in life and being miserable and unhappy. I mean, who pursues unhappiness? You would think this is crazy, and yet some dramatic characters do, don't they? They seem to almost throw themselves into tragedy and experience it to the full. And I think I saw this with my mum, that she was experiencing certain tragedies as elevating and great and in some way. And I thought, this is bizarre. I don't think I want to go down this road. I'm going to keep away from that. It's very strange, isn't it, when your hero, in this case Mum, as the younger, further we go back perhaps, becomes seen as a very normal person of not necessarily heroic and pure motives. That she has feet of clay after all. And it's a bit of a shock. I might say, dangerously, a bit self-elevating too, in that suddenly you become the judge, and you can't somehow not be the judge, because you see things that just are not adding up, and it's not in her interest to do this, it's not good, it's not bringing a blessing. Why is she doing this? Which is to say, I would not, and be right and she's wrong. Now, this is something we in religions we don't allow when it comes to our relationship with God. There's a sort of basic tenet: God is always right, I must be wrong. Now, I think we need a defense against that, or an overcoming even, not just a defense, so that the concept that our God is the personification of our values means that I can look at God and think, oh, this doesn't seem to work after all. Perhaps, for instance, being loyal to one's leader, come what may, it doesn't bring the total happiness and life and fullness and so on and care that I value. And therefore, it's best not to always obey. And therefore, I've now adjusted my values, that it's not an iron, strict rule to always obey the leader. And in fact, some of the key things in war where the general is not obeyed, whatever the principle is above him, his orders, he's gone out on a limb and been very heroic and, has won the battle because of it or something, and gets highly decorated and commended for it, for wonderful services to his country. He actually did the right thing to question whether he should always keep obeying orders. But of course, had it have turned out wrong, then he would have been utterly condemned for not obeying orders. Yes. But if we understand that God is the personification, should be the personification of what we truly value, well, we see it's wrong, we're changing our values, and our picture of God changes. So he still stays, he, spirit, person, gender neutral. God still stays in the position of being obeyed, because we now feel we've come to understand God better than before. It was us that was wrong. We were seeing God wrongly. He doesn't require, for instance, slavish patriotism. He actually prefers us to care for all races, all people, in fact possibly even all life. Although, what does that mean in practice when the tiger's attacking your kids? Well, you probably kill the tiger if you can. Yes, if you can simply whisk the child out of danger, that would be a better option, but that may not appeal as very available in the emergency. So it's not clear what actions follow in the world, because one has other priorities as well, other values. And so, as I say, we actually have a hierarchy of values, and one defers to others in different circumstances. And the world situations that we keep experiencing teach us much of that, so that we revise our values, and therefore our view of God. We're still totally obedient to our God, but our God is changing with us through time, since in some sense it can only be our perception of him. That's all we have. In other words, we only have the thought form that we have. And the whole point of maturing is that we're developing, nurturing this, what is probably a very limited and inconsistent set of thoughts at present, into something that is conducive, consistent with life abundant here and life eternal in the kingdom, which, as we say, from the Jesus point of view, means within. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.